Did you know that America once considered unleashing an army of bats to defeat their enemies? These winged creatures have been revered in many cultures for their supernatural abilities, but they were also used as weapons by the United States military. During World War II, the U.S. developed a top-secret project called Project X-Ray, which involved training bats to carry bombs and release them over enemy targets. But this plan never saw the light of day. And now, some people believe that these so-called bat bombs may still exist somewhere in the world today. What's going on here? Let's find out the truth behind these mysterious devices. It all started when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. The U.S. was caught off guard and unprepared for the sneak attack, which resulted in the deaths of more than 2,400 Americans. In response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war on Japan and began mobilizing the country's resources for the fight ahead. But he knew that if the U.S. was to be truly prepared, they needed to develop some new and innovative weaponry to use against their enemies. That's where Project X-Ray came in. The project was initiated by the U.S. Army's Chemical Warfare Service and involved training Mexican free-tailed bats to serve as tiny airborne bombers. It sounds crazy, right? It gets even weirder. The plan was to attach small bombs to the bats' bodies using a harness system and then release them over Japanese cities. As the bats flew through open windows or small holes in buildings, they would drop their bombs inside and detonate them using a mechanical timer. Though Project X-Ray was officially declassified in 1985, details about the program were kept under wraps for decades. It wasn't until recently that we learned the full scope of what this bizarre project entailed. But why exactly did the U.S. military want to use bats as weapons? You see, when World War II began, the U.S. military was eager to find any advantage they could over their enemies. They knew that conventional weapons like bombs and bullets weren't always effective at taking out important targets. They needed something new. At the time, they'd already experimented with using animals as weapons, such as dogs and cats. But they wanted something smaller, more stealthy, and with a bigger payload capacity. Enter the Mexican free-tailed bat, a species native to North America known for its agility and speed. The U.S. military believed that these bats were the perfect candidate for their new top-secret weapon. But training them wasn't easy. You see, the plan was to attach small bombs to the bats' harnesses and then release them over Japanese cities. The bats would fly through open windows or small holes in buildings, drop their bombs inside before detonating them with a mechanical timer. But getting these tiny creatures to do what the military wanted was easier said than done. They tried using food and other incentives to get the bats to fly through certain areas, but they struggled to keep the animals on target. Not to mention, they had to develop a bomb small enough to be carried by a bat without weighing it down too much. This proved to be another huge challenge. Despite the difficulties, the U.S. military pressed on with Project X-Ray, believing that the potential payoff was worth it. They envisioned an army of tiny winged kamikaze bombers swooping in to take out high-value targets deep within Japanese territory. But there was one major problem with this plan. For it to work, they needed a lot of bats, like a whole lot. The U.S. military began capturing bats in the wild and bringing them to a facility in Fort Detrick, Maryland, for training. But this meant that the bats were exposed to predators and each other, which led to a lot of casualties. Plus, keeping the animals contained was a nightmare. They quickly overwhelmed their cages and began escaping, forcing the military to invest in more secure facilities. All of this added up quickly and made Project X-Ray a very expensive endeavor. As the war dragged on and the U.S. military suffered setbacks, they began to question the value of Project X-Ray. They realized that the cost of developing and training the bats far outweighed the potential benefits. Plus, with the advancement of other technologies, like radar and sonar, they had other options for taking out important targets. So in 1945, just before the end of World War II, Project X-Ray was officially abandoned. The surviving bats were released into the wild, and the documents about the project were sealed away. But not everyone was happy with the cancellation of Project X-Ray. Some people believed that the U.S. military was onto something big, and that these tiny winged wonders could have been a game-changer in the war. They argued that with a little more time and funding, the military could have perfected the system and unleashed an army of bats to take out key Japanese targets. Others, however, were relieved that the project was scrapped. They felt that using animals as weapons was unethical, and that the U.S. military should focus on more traditional methods of warfare. Whatever your thoughts may be, there's no denying that Project XRA was a fascinating experiment. It showed just how far the US military was willing to go to gain an edge in World War II, but it also raised important questions about the use of animals in warfare and the ethics of developing new weapons. Today, some people believe that the so-called bat bomb still exists somewhere in the world. They claim that the US military never fully gave up on the idea and that they've even hiding the truth about Project X-ray for decades. Others argue that the documents relating to the project are readily available and that there's nothing to suggest the bat bombs ever actually existed. Only time will tell if these mysterious devices will ever be found and what secrets they hold about America's past. One thing is for sure, though, the idea of an army of tiny winged kamikaze bombers is sure to send shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. Just imagine a swarm of bats swooping in out of the night sky, dropping their deadly payloads, and then vanishing into the darkness. It's a terrifying thought that makes you wonder why we do and hear more about Project X-ray and the so-called bat bombs. Could it be that the US military is hiding something from us? Or are the bat bombs nothing but a figment of our imagination? Now let's talk about some other strange and scary projects that the US military has worked on. Did you know that they once considered creating an underwater city to spy on the Russians? Yeah, it's true. During the Cold War, the US military explored the idea of building a secret underwater base in the Arctic Ocean. The plan was to use the base to spy on Soviet naval activity and to launch covert missions behind enemy lines. But the project was eventually abandoned due to the high cost and technical difficulties involved. They also worked on Project Shad, which involved training dolphins to be underwater spies. The dolphins would be equipped with cameras and microphones to gather intelligence on Soviet ships and submarines. But the animals were difficult to train, and the project was eventually canceled. There was also Project 625, which involved developing a giant robotic spider crab that could crawl along the ocean floor and take pictures of Soviet nuclear test sites. But the project was plagued by mechanical problems, and the crab never worked properly. These aren't the only crazy projects the military has worked on, but they're some of the most interesting. From underwater cities to robotic spider crabs, the US military has explored some pretty wacky ideas. Who knows what other top-secret projects are still being kept under wraps today? If you liked this video, make sure to check out our other videos about the US military and other crazy topics. We've got plenty of content that's sure to blow your mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.